Hey guys, tonight we begin with the surprisingly long and fascinating story of Paleolithic humans. The very first chapter of human history. A world before cities, before farming, before written language, when survival depended on sharp instincts, shared stories, and the ability to adapt to a planet that was often cold, dangerous, and wildly unpredictable. What were these early humans really like? Were they just grunting cavemen wrapped in animal skins, endlessly chasing mammoths across frozen landscapes? Or was their world far more intelligent, creative, and surprisingly human than we usually imagine? Tonight, we'll follow the origins of Paleolithic people from the earliest stone tool makers in Africa to the hunters, artists, and wanderers who slowly spread across the world. Along the way, we'll uncover Paleolithic period, art, toolmaking, and some of the oldest cave paintings still feel strangely alive thousands of years later. So before you settle in beside tonight's virtual campfire, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these quiet journeys into the past. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. I always love seeing this little nighttime gathering stretch across different countries and time zones. Now, dim the lights, maybe pull up a blanket, let the background sound soften around you, and together, let's travel back tens of thousands of years, to the origin and history of Paleolithic humanity. Paleolithic period, ancient cultural stage, or level, of human development, characterized by the use of rudimentary chipped stone tools. The popular Paleo diet, or Stone Age diet, is based on foods humans presumably would have consumed during the Paleolithic period. The onset of the Paleolithic period has traditionally coincided with the first evidence of tool construction and use by Homo some 2.58 million years ago, near the beginning of the Pleistocene epoch, about 2.58 million to 11,700 years ago. In 2015, however, researchers excavating a dry riverbed near Kenya's Lake Turkana discovered primitive stone tools embedded in rocks dating to 3.3 million years ago, the middle of the Pliocene epoch, some 5.3 million to 2.58 million years ago. Those tools predate the oldest confirmed specimens of Homo by almost a million years, which raises the possibility that toolmaking originated with Australopithecus or its contemporaries and that the timing of the onset of this cultural stage should be re-evaluated. The Paleolithic period is often divided into three parts: lower, middle, and upper. However, anthropologists resist placing hard-time boundaries on each subdivision and the stages within them, because technologies characteristic of different industries emerged at different times in different regions. In addition, there is some level of overlap between stages and subdivisions because it took time for new technologies to spread, which created the circumstance in which some groups of people had access to higher levels of technology earlier than their contemporaries. The Lower Paleolithic is traditionally divided into the Oldowan stage, about 2.6 million to 1 million years ago, which saw the development of pebble, chopping, tools, and the Acheulean stage, 1.7 to 1.5 million years ago to about 250,000 to 200,000 years ago, in which more sophisticated hand axes and cleaving tools emerged. With the discovery of the tools excavated at Lake Turkana, some anthropologists have suggested adding a third stage, the Lomekwian stage, to account for 700,000 years of early hammering and other rock-chipping tools that predated the Oldowan stage. The Middle Paleolithic, which was characterized by flake tools and the widespread use of fire, lasted from about 250,000 to 30,000 years ago. The Upper Paleolithic, which saw the emergence of more sophisticated tools, lasted from about 50,000 to 40,000 years ago until about 10,000 years ago. At sites dating from the Lower Paleolithic period, simple pebble tools have been found in association with the remains of what may have been some of the earliest human ancestors. A somewhat more sophisticated Lower Paleolithic tradition, known as the chopper chopping tool industry, is widely distributed in the Eastern Hemisphere, and it is thought to have been the work of the hominin species named Homo erectus. It is believed that H. erectus probably made tools of wood and bone, although no such fossil tools have yet been found, as well as of stone. About 700,000 years ago a new Lower Paleolithic tool, the hand axe, appeared. The earliest European hand axes are assigned to the Abbevillean industry, which developed in northern France in the valley of the Somme River. A later, more refined hand axe tradition is seen in the Acheulean industry, evidence of which has been found in Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Some of the earliest known hand axes were found at Olduvai Gorge, Tanzania, in association with remains of H. erectus. Alongside the hand axe tradition there developed a distinct and very different stone tool industry, based on flakes of stone. Special tools were made from worked, carefully shaped, flakes of flint. In Europe the Clactonian industry is one example of a flake tradition. The early flake industries probably contributed to the development of the Middle Paleolithic flake tools of the Mysterian industry, which is associated with the remains of Neanderthals. Other items dating to the Middle Paleolithic are shell beads found in both North and South Africa. In Tafrelt, Morocco, the beads were dated to approximately 82,000 years ago, and other, younger examples were encountered in Blombos Cave, Blombosfontein Nature Reserve, on the southern coast of South Africa. Experts determined that the patterns of wear seemed to indicate that some of these shells were suspended, some were engraved, and examples from both sites were covered with red ochre. The Upper Paleolithic period was characterized by the emergence of regional stone tool industries, such as the Perigordian, Aurignacian, Solutrean, and Magdalenian of Europe as well as other localized industries of the Old World and the oldest known cultures of the New World. Principally associated with the fossil remains of such anatomically modern humans as Cro-Magnons, Upper Paleolithic industries exhibit greater complexity, specialization, and variety of tool types, such as those made of bone, ivory, and antlers, and the emergence of distinctive regional artistic traditions involving paintings and sculpture and musical instruments. Two main forms of Paleolithic art are known to modern scholars: small sculptures, and monumental paintings, incised designs, and reliefs on the walls of caves. Such works were produced throughout the Mediterranean region and other scattered parts of Eurasia and Africa but survived in quantity only in Eastern Europe and parts of Spain and France. Small sculptured pieces evidently dominated the Upper Paleolithic artistic traditions of Eastern Europe. Typical were small, portable clay figurines and bone and ivory carvings. The works from this area include simple but realistic stone and clay animal figurines, as well as carved stone statuettes of women, referred to by scholars as Venus figures. These small stylized figures are characteristically rotund, emphasizing parts of the female body associated with sexuality and fertility. Many are so abstract that only protuberant breasts and exaggerated hips are clearly distinguishable. Monumental arts flourished in Western Europe, the province of the so-called Franco-Cantabrian school, where limestone caves, such as those of Chauvet, Pont d'Arc and Lascaux Grotto, provided a sheltered surface for paintings, incised designs, and relief carvings. These caves have preserved much small carving of fine quality and an abundant and varied sample of prehistoric graphic art, from simple finger tracings in clay to sophisticated polychrome paintings, generally depicting animals, of dynamic naturalism and exquisite design. The function or purpose of art in Paleolithic life remains a subject of debate. Some scholars see the human and animal representations as evidence of the use of magical rites to ensure success in hunting or to guarantee fertility. Others have suggested that Paleolithic artists' accurate representations of animals' coats may be an early attempt to produce a seasonal notation system. Another viewpoint, disregarding utility altogether, sees the art of Paleolithic peoples solely as an outgrowth of a basic human need to creatively record and reproduce aspects of the surrounding world. Among the bone and ivory carvings dating to the Paleolithic are several examples of partial bone or ivory flutes, including one with 5 finger holes, found at Hohlfels Cave, near Ulm, Germany, and dated to about 35,000 years ago. Those flutes give evidence of yet another art form practiced in prehistoric cultures. Stone Age, prehistoric cultural stage, or level of human development, characterized by the creation and use of stone tools. The Stone Age, whose origin coincides with the discovery of the oldest known stone tools, which have been dated to some 3.3 million years ago, is usually divided into 3 separate periods: Paleolithic period, Mesolithic period, and Neolithic period, based on the degree of sophistication in the fashioning and use of tools. Paleolithic archaeology is concerned with the origins and development of early human culture between the first appearance of human beings as tool-using mammals, which is believed to have occurred sometime before 3.3 million years ago, and about 8000 BCE, near the beginning of the Holocene epoch, 11,700 years ago to the present. It is included in the time span of the Pleistocene, or glacial, epoch, an interval lasting from about 2,600,000 to 11,700 years ago. Modern evidence suggests that the earliest proto-human forms had diverged from the ancestral primate stock by the beginning of the Pleistocene. In any case, the oldest recognizable tools were found in rock layers of Middle Pliocene epoch, some 3.3 million years ago, raising the possibility that toolmaking began with Australopithecus or its contemporaries. During the Pleistocene, which followed directly after the Pliocene, a series of momentous climatic events occurred. The northern latitudes and mountainous areas were subjected on 4 successive occasions to the advances and retreats of ice sheets, known as guns, Mindel, Riss, and Worm in the Alps. River valleys and terraces were formed, the present coastlines were established, and great changes were induced in the fauna and flora of the globe. In large measure, the development of culture during Paleolithic times seems to have been profoundly influenced by the environmental factors that characterize the successive stages of the Pleistocene epoch. Throughout the Paleolithic, humans were food gatherers, depending for their subsistence on hunting wild animals and birds, fishing, and collecting wild fruits, nuts, and berries. The artifactual record of this exceedingly long interval is very incomplete. It can be studied from such imperishable objects of now extinct cultures as were made of flint, stone, bone, and antler. These alone have withstood the ravages of time, and, together with the remains of contemporary animals hunted by our prehistoric forerunners, they are all that scholars have to guide them in attempting to reconstruct human activity throughout this vast interval, approximately 98% of the time span since the appearance of the first true hominin stock. In general, these materials develop gradually from single, all-purpose tools to an assemblage of varied and highly specialized types of artifacts, each designed to serve in connection with a specific function. Indeed, it is a process of increasingly more complex technologies, each founded on a specific tradition, that characterizes the cultural development of Paleolithic times. In other words, the trend was from simple to complex, from a stage of non-specialization to stages of relatively high degrees of specialization, just as has been the case during historic times. In the manufacture of stone implements, 4 fundamental traditions were developed by the Paleolithic ancestors: 1. Pebble tool traditions, 2. Bifacial tool, or hand axe, traditions, 3. Flake tool traditions, and 4. Blade tool traditions. Only rarely are any of these found in pure form, and this fact has led to mistaken notions in many instances concerning the significance of various assemblages. Indeed, though a certain tradition might be superseded in a given region by a more advanced method of producing tools, the older technique persisted as long as it was needed for a given purpose. In general, however, there is an overall trend in the order as given above, starting with simple pebble tools that have a single edge sharpened for cutting or chopping. In southern and eastern Asia, pebble tools of an early type continued in use throughout Paleolithic times. French place names have long been used to designate the various Paleolithic subdivisions, since many of the earliest discoveries were made in France. This terminology has been widely applied in other countries, notwithstanding the very great regional differences that do in fact exist. But the French sequence still serves as the foundation of Paleolithic studies in other parts of the Old World. There is reasonable agreement that the Paleolithic ended with the beginning of the Holocene geologic and climatic era about 11,700 years ago, about 9,700 BCE. It is also increasingly clear that a developmental bifurcation in human cultural history took place at about this time. In most of the world, especially in the temperate and tropical woodland environments or along the southern fringes of Arctic tundra, the older Upper Paleolithic traditions of life were simply readapted toward more or less increasingly intensified levels of food collection. These cultural readaptations of older food procedures to the variety and succession of post-Pleistocene environments are generally referred to as occurring in the Mesolithic period. But also by 800 BCE, if not even somewhat earlier, in certain semi-arid environments of the world's middle latitudes, traces of a quite different course of development began to appear. These traces indicate a movement toward incipient agriculture and, in 1 or 2 instances, animal domestication. In the case of southwestern Asia, This movement had already culminated in a level of effective village farming communities by 700 BCE. In Mesoamerica, a comparable development, somewhat different in its details and without animal domestication, was taking place almost as early. It may thus be maintained that in the environmentally favorable portions of southwestern Asia, Mesoamerica, the coastal slopes below the Andes, and perhaps in southeastern Asia, for which little evidence is available, little if any trace of the Mesolithic stage need be anticipated. The general level of culture probably shifted directly from that of the Upper Paleolithic to that of incipient cultivation and domestication. The type tools of the Abbevillean, formerly Chilean, which takes its name from the town of Abbeville, France, on the 45-meter, 150-foot, terrace of the Somme Valley, consist of pointed, bifacial implements, or hand axes. Their forms vary, and the flaking is generally irregular. It is probable that they were manufactured either with a stone hammer or on a stone anvil. Associated with these types of hand axes, simple flake tools are found, but they lack definite form. The Abbevillean has been reported from deposits of Lower Pleistocene, First Interglacial, age. The Acheulean, which begins in the Second Interglacial and persists to the close of the Third Interglacial, covers by far the longest time span of any of the Paleolithic traditions found in Western Europe. The type site is on the 30-meter, 98-foot, terrace of the Somme Valley at Saint-Acheulean, near Amiens, in northern France. Acheulean hand axes, which display a marked technological refinement over their Abbevillean precursors, were apparently made by employing a wooden or bone billet rather than the stone-on-stone technique. But, except at the very end of the Acheulean cycle of development, there is very little typological difference in the types of hand axes found in the various layers. The Mycoquean, or final, upper, Acheulean, is characterized by elongated hand axes that exhibit very straight and finely chipped edges, in marked contrast with the lower Acheulean, in which ovate forms predominate. Flake tools occur in all Acheulean levels, the side scrapers being the predominant type. Many of these tools were made from trimming flakes produced during the process of hand axe manufacture. In general, flake tools, including points with a triangular cross-section, are found in greater quantities in Mycoquean deposits than in the older horizons. The evidence from Clacton-on-Sea, Essex, and Swanscombe, Kent, in the Thames Valley of southeastern England clearly shows that the main development of the Clactonian occurred during early Second Interglacial times. The type artifacts are flakes, although core tools, single-edged choppers and chopping tools, do in fact occur. The flakes, which have large, high-angle, greater than 90 degrees, plane striking platforms, as well as prominent bulbs of percussion, were detached from roughly prepared, discoidal cores by the stone hammer or stone anvil technique. Actual retouching or secondary working of the edge is found in some instances, but for the most part it is rough, and edge chipping resulting from use is far more characteristic. Named after a locality at Levallois, a suburb of Paris, the Levalloisian is primarily a flake tradition, although hand axes are found in certain of the middle and upper Levalloisian stages. It first appears in deposits of the late Second Interglacial in association with hand axes of Middle Acheulean type and persists into Fourth Glacial, Worm, times. It is characterized by a new and improved method of producing flakes, which previously had been obtained in a more or less haphazard manner. This involves the careful shaping of the core by the removal of centrally directed flakes, and the preparation of an extremity for the detachment of a symmetrical oval flake. Since unstruck cores of this type exhibit a plano-convex section suggesting the form of a tortoise, they are known as tortoise cores. On the striking platforms of typical Levallois flakes, small vertical flake scars, called facets, may be observed, and the scars of the converging core preparation flakes are present on the upper surface. The use of this technique resulted in the production not only of symmetrical flakes but also of larger ones in proportion to the size of the core. In the Middle and Upper Levalloisian a variation of this same basic technique was developed whereby it was possible to produce either triangular flakes, or points, or rectangular flakes, or flake blades, by modifying the method of core preparation. The Middle Paleolithic comprises the Mousterian, a portion of the Levalloisian, and the Tayacian, all of which are complexes based on the production of flakes, although survivals of the old hand axe tradition are manifest in many instances. These Middle Paleolithic assemblages first appear in deposits of the Third Interglacial and persist during the first major oscillation of the Fourth Glacial, worm, stage. Associated with the Tayacian, in which the artifacts consist of flakes, remains of modern humans, Homo sapiens, have been found. The Mousterian industry, on the other hand, is associated with the Neanderthals. It is in the Mousterian levels of the caves and rock shelters of central and southern France that the earliest evidence of the use of fire and the first definite burials have been discovered in Western Europe. The cave of Le Moustier, near Les Izes in the classic Dordogne region of France, is the type site of the Mousterian. The typology of the artifacts is complex. It consists of three distinct increments. 1. The prepared striking platform, tortoise core, Levalloisian, tradition. 2. The plain striking platform, discoidal core technique of ultimate Clactonian tradition. And 3. A persistence of the bifacial core tool, or Acheulean tradition. The type artifacts from the Mousterian consist of points and side scrapers, in addition to a few hand axes, especially heart or triangular-shaped forms, and the secondary working is rough. A bone industry appears here for the first time. Judging by what is known concerning modern hunting groups, small bands of people already had developed simple social institutions, even at this early level of development. The Upper Paleolithic, which occupies only approximately 1/10 of the time span of the period as a whole, first appears in horizons referable to the worm 1 to 2 interstadial, and it persists to the very end of late glacial times. Early humans made their greatest cultural progress at this time. The hand axes and flake tools of the earlier assemblages were replaced by diversified and specialized tools made on blades struck from specially prepared cores. Many important inventions appeared, such as needles and thread, skin clothing, hafted stone and bone tools, the harpoon, the spear thrower, and special fishing equipment. Bone, ivory, and antler, in addition to flint, were extensively used. The earliest man-made dwellings are found, consisting of semi-subterranean pit houses. Of prime importance and interest is the beginning of the basic techniques of drawing, modeling, sculpture, and painting, as well as the earliest manifestations of dancing, music, the use of masks, ceremonies, and the organization of society into patterns that were apparently fairly complex. Indeed, the location of certain settlements suggests a more complex social life, including perhaps collective hunting. There is evidence for fertility magic, private property, and possible social stratification. Furthermore, types of early humans disappeared, and the remains of humans of modern type, Homo sapiens, alone are found in Upper Paleolithic sites. The chronology of this interval in Western Europe shows a succession of cultures known as Lower Perigordian, or Châtelperronian, formerly Lower Aurignacian, Upper Perigordian, or Gravettian, formerly Upper Aurignacian, Solutrean, and Magdalenian, each characterized by its distinctive types of artifacts. These latter occur, together with gravers, or burins, end scrapers, points, etc., which are common to all levels. The graver itself is a very important tool, for its invention made possible the extensive working of bone and facilitated the development of art. The climate of the Upper Paleolithic varied from cold steppe, or even Arctic tundra, to north temperate, taiga, similar to parts of Siberia and Canada of the 21st century. In the Perigordian, named after a region in south-central France, blades with steeply retouched backs are typical. The Lower Perigordian is characterized by large curved points with blunted backs that are known as Châtelperron points. These first appear, together with other types of blade tools, in horizons immediately overlying Upper Mousterian levels. It is believed that the straight points with blunted backs, called gravet points and characteristic of the Upper Perigordian, were evolved from the Châtelperron type. In the final stage of the Upper Perigordian, tanged font Robert points and diminutive multi-angle gravers, known as the Noailles burin, are found. A number of small sculptured human torsos depicting the female form have been found at Upper Perigordian sites. The type site of the Aurignacian is near the village of Aurignac, Haute-Garonne, in southern France. At many sites it is found intervening between horizons referable to the Lower and the Upper Perigordian, a fact that is considered to indicate that more than one cultural element was present in Western Europe at the beginning of Upper Paleolithic times. The tool types include various kinds of steep-ended scrapers, nose scrapers, blades with heavy marginal retouch, strangulated blades, buskeyed gravers, or burins, and split-base bone points. Bone was extensively used, mainly for javelin points, chisels, perforators, and batons de commandement, or arrow straighteners. Articles of personal adornment, probably worn as necklaces, such as pierced teeth and shells, as well as decorated bits of bone and ivory, appear for the first time in the Aurignacian. The oldest manifestations of art were produced during the Aurignacian, and the development continued during Upper Perigordian times. In general, Upper Paleolithic art falls into two closely related categories: mural art and portable art. The former includes finger tracings, paintings, engravings, bas-reliefs, and sculptures on the walls of caves and rock shelters. The latter is characterized by small engravings and sculptures on stone and bone found in the occupation layers. The whole development may owe its inspiration to the magico-religious idea, especially the custom of hunting magic. The Solutrean, which is named after the site of Solutre, near Macon, Soni Tielwar, is noted for the beautifully made, symmetrical, bifacially flaked, laurel leaf, and shouldered points, the finest examples of flint workmanship of the Paleolithic in Western Europe. In addition, the usual types of gravers, end scrapers, points, perforators, etc., are present. Examples of Solutrean art are comparatively rare. They consist of sculpture in low relief and incised stone slabs. The fauna indicates that this culture flourished in a relatively cold climate. The rock shelter of La Madeleine, near Les Izes, Dordogne, is the type Magdalenian locality. This final culture of the Upper Paleolithic is noted for the dominance of bone and antler tools over those of flint and stone, and for the very remarkable works of art that were produced at this time. The wide variety of bone tools include javelin points, barbed bone points, or harpoons, eyed needles, batons de commandement, often elaborately decorated, perforators, spear throwers, chisels, etc. The flint and stone tools include a variety of special forms, among which small geometric forms, denticulate blades, scrapers with steeply retouched edges, and the parrot-beak graver are especially distinctive. The 6 phases of the Magdalenian have been established stratigraphically and are characterized mainly by the contained bone and antler implements. But the heights attained by the people responsible for this culture can best be evaluated on the basis of the art objects they produced. Magdalenian sites have yielded countless fine examples of both mural and portable art. Animals of the period, the usual subject matter, are portrayed in paintings, often polychrome, engravings, and sculptures. The fauna from the various Magdalenian horizons demonstrates that cold conditions prevailed in Western Europe at the end of Paleolithic times. In the Upper Paleolithic of Europe, certain evidence exists for what must have already been well-organized collective hunting activities, such as the horse stampede traces of Solutre, France, and the great concentrations of mammoth bones of the Gravettian hut settlements of Czechoslovakia and Russia. Cultural adaptations appear to have been made to restricted local areas or niches and to the fluctuations of climate and environment during the changing phases at the end of the Pleistocene range of time. In fact, it could be maintained generally that Upper Paleolithic traditions flowed rather smoothly into the Mesolithic, with no more significant indication of cultural development than further environmental readaptations. The level of intensified food-collecting cultures of the early Holocene period in the Old World is best known from northwestern Europe, and it is with regard to this area that the term Mesolithic has greatest currency to denominate archaeological traces. A classic example of such traces comes from the Magelmos bog site of Denmark, although there are comparable materials ranging from England to the eastern Baltic lands. These bogs were probably more or less swampy lakes in Mesolithic times. At about 6000 BCE, when the Magelmosian culture flourished, traces of huts with bark-covered floors have been found. Flint axes for felling trees and adzes for working wood have appeared, as well as a variety of smaller flint tools, including a great number of microlithic scale. These were mounted as points or barbs in arrows and harpoons and were also used in other composite tools. There were adzes and chisels of antler or bone, besides needles and pins, fish hooks, harpoons, and several pronged fish spears. Some larger tools, of ground stone, e.g., club heads, have appeared. Wooden implements also have survived because of the unusually favorable preservative qualities of the bogs. Bows, arrow shafts, axe handles, paddles, and even a dugout canoe have been discovered. Fish nets were made of bark fiber. There is good evidence that the Moglomosian sites were only seasonally occupied. Deer were successfully hunted, and fish and waterfowl were taken, and it appears possible that several varieties of marsh plants were utilized. At Star Carr, in northern England, there are indications that 4 or 5 huts existed in the settlement, with a population of about 25 people. This description of the Moglomosian must suffice to represent a considerable variety of European manifestations of the level of intensified post-Pleistocene food collecting. The catalogues of the Azilian and Tardenoisian industries of Western Europe, of the Arensbergian of northern Germany, of the Asturian of Spain, etc., would each differ in detail, but all would point in the same general direction as regards cultural historical interpretation. As a further and far distant example, the Nchikufan culture of southern Zimbabwe might be cited. Here again, microlithic flint bladelet tools, with certain types mounted as projectile points or in composite tools, existed. The Nchikufan cave walls show semi-naturalistic drawings, and the caves also contain pencils of red and black pigment. Groundstone axes and adzes, bored stones, digging stick weights, and normal-sized chopping and scraping tools of chipped stone also occurred. Grindstones of various types indicate a degree of dependence on collected vegetable foods, and the animal bones suggest specialization in the hunting of zebras, wildebeests, hartebeests, and wild pigs. These Nchikufan materials date back to at least 4,500 BCE. Again, an intensified level of food collecting is implied. Though there are vast gaps in our knowledge of the Holocene period in many parts of the Old World, enough is known to see the general cultural level of this range of time. Outside of the regions where food production was establishing itself, the period was one of a gradual settling in and of an increasingly intensive utilization of all the resources of restricted regional niches. At first, the level seems nowhere to have achieved a climax of artistic expression, such as that, for example, of Upper Perigordian, Magdalenian times. But, as time went on, certain climaxes within the matrix of an intensified level of food collection did occur. An often cited example might be the complex art and social organization of the cultures of the northwest coast of British Columbia. More often, however, as the culture history of the Holocene period proceeded, cultures at the level of intensified food collecting were captured by being absorbed within an expanding matrix of the new elements, procedures, and traditions of food production or, subsequent to its appearance, by the expansion of civilized societies. The origins and history of European Neolithic culture are closely connected with the post-glacial climate and forest development. The increasing temperature after the late Dryas period during the pre-boreal and the boreal, circa 800 to 5500 BCE, determined by radiocarbon dating, caused a remarkable change in late glacial flora and fauna. Thus, the Mediterranean zone became the center of the first cultural modifications leading from the last hunters and food gatherers to the earliest farmers. This was established by some important excavations in the mid-20th century in the Middle East, which unearthed the first stages of early agriculture and stock breeding, 7th and 6th millennia BCE, with wheat, barley, dogs, sheep, and goats. Early pre-pottery Neolithic finds, probably 6th millennium BCE, have been made in the Argisa Magula near Larissa, Thessaly, Greece, while excavations in Lipensky Vir, Balkan Peninsula, have brought to light some sculptures of the same period. The independent origin of European Neolithic was established, and it was thought highly probable that the cradle of farming in the Middle East had not been the only one. There were others in Europe, too. Neolithic farming in Europe developed on its own lines in the 4 different ecological zones. These are, the Mediterranean zone of evergreen forest and winter rains, north of the Pyrenees, the Alps, and the Balkans, the temperate zone of deciduous forest and evenly distributed annual rainfall, still farther north the circumpolar taiga, or coniferous forest, the only zone to remain free of agriculture and stock breeding, and to the southeast the western end of the Eurasian steppe. Each zone itself is subdivided into natural regions by physiographic boundaries and peculiarities of climate or soil. Only the 3 major divisions of the temperate zone are not obvious from every map. We may distinguish Western Europe, from the Atlantic to the Vosges and Alps and including the British Isles, the lowlands of Central Europe, including Ukraine and limited by the Balkans and the Harz, and the northern province, that portion of the Eurasiatic plain lying between the Rhine and the Vistula and including Denmark and southern Sweden. The substantial Neolithic communities that arose by 600 BCE must have been largely recruited from indigenous Mesolithic hunters and fishers, attested to so abundantly in Western and Northern Europe by various remains. Some communities indeed seem to be composed entirely of such Mesolithic stocks, though they had adopted a Neolithic equipment from immigrant farmers, such are sometimes termed secondary Neolithic. From these Mesolithic survivors, too, must be derived much of the science and equipment applied in Neolithic times to adapting societies to European environments. Upon the resultant distinctively European technology and economy was reared a no less original ideological superstructure expressed in distinctive sepulchral monuments, styles of ceramic decoration, and fashions in personal ornaments. In each of the above-mentioned provinces, the archaeological record begins with the early stages of farming, as in Thessaly. In the Mediterranean zone, this early farming is connected with the Cardium pottery, decorated by shell impressions of Cardium edule, cultivation of the land having been proved by pollen-analytical methods in France, as elsewhere in temperate Europe, while northern Germany and southern Scandinavia revealed grain prints in potsherds, Bert Bolellerbeck. The process of cultural formation and modification during the Neolithic may be studied with the help of the different kinds of pottery and stone artifacts. Save in the taiga, where a Mesolithic economy persisted until the end of the Bronze Age, the basis of life everywhere was subsistence farming, supplemented by some measure of hunting and fishing, fish being a source of food curiously neglected in Western and Central Europe during the earlier phases of the Neolithic. Everywhere the same cereals were cultivated, together with beans, peas, and lentils. In the Mediterranean zone, orchard husbandry may already have begun, while around the Alps, apples were eventually cultivated and utilized for the preparation of a sort of cider. The balance between cultivation and stock breeding varied. Throughout the temperate zone, sheep, though bred even in Britain and Denmark, were at first rare. The damp temperate forests were uncongenial to these animals, and only toward the end of the Neolithic period, when the greater dryness of the subboreal climatic phase and incipient clearing for plough cultivation were leaving their mark on the landscape, did flocks begin to multiply. On the lowlands, in early Neolithic times, animal husbandry may have played a subordinate role as compared with agriculture. But in the sequel, cattle raising combined with hunting proved to be the most productive pursuit among the deciduous forests with a Neolithic equipment. Cultivation was relegated to an increasingly secondary place, until in the late Bronze Age more efficient tools for clearing land became generally available. The rural economy permitted the continuous occupation of permanent villages around the Aegean and in the Balkan Peninsula, perhaps also in southern Italy and the Iberian Peninsula. In the temperate zone, shifting cultivation may have been based on slash-and-burn clearance. Under this extravagant system, plots were presumably tilled with hoes, as in parts of Africa today. But by the beginning of the Bronze Age, the ox-drawn plough was beginning to replace the hoe. Dwelling houses in Greece, Sicily, and the Iberian Peninsula were built, as in the Middle East, of pisé, or mud brick, on stone foundations. But in the Balkans and throughout the temperate zone, wood was used for the construction of gabled houses, stout posts serving to support the ridgepole and the walls of split saplings or wattle and daub. The earliest houses on the lowland of Central Europe were very large, up to 42 meters, 135 feet, in length and large enough to accommodate a whole lineage or small clan together with stalled cattle and grain stores. In the sequel these communal houses gave place to smaller two-room dwellings, 7.5 to 10 meters, 24.5 to 33 feet, long but still entered through one end. Finally in late Neolithic times clusters of one-roomed huts became the most widespread fashion. Around the Alps such two-roomed houses and, less often, one-roomed huts were raised on piles above the shores of lakes or on platforms laid on peat mosses. These are the world-famous Swiss lake dwellings, Auffahrtssiedlungen, that have yielded such precious collections of the organic substances from wood to bread that are otherwise missing from the archaeological record. In northern Europe, too, the earliest villages consisted of two parallel, long communal houses, but these were subdivided by cross walls into 20 or more apartments, each with a separate door. But here again the communal houses eventually broke up into freestanding one-roomed huts. Finally, Skara Brae on the treeless island of Orkney illustrates an ingenious adaptation of the one-roomed wooden hut to an inhospitable environment but shows how commodiously such huts must always have been furnished. Carpenters used celts, axe or adze heads, edged by grinding and polishing of fine-grained rock or of flint where that material was available in large nodules. In Greece and the Balkans, all over Central Europe and Ukraine, and throughout the taiga, adzes were used exclusively, as in the earlier Baltic Mesolithic. In northern and western Europe axes were preferred. In the Iberian Peninsula axes and adzes occur in equal numbers in early Neolithic graves, but the proportion of axes increased later. Often in Western Europe, and occasionally in Greece and Cyprus, celts were mounted with the aid of antler sleeves inserted between the stone head and the wooden handle, a device that was already employed in the northern European Mesolithic. In Spain, the British Isles, and northern Europe axe heads were simply stuck into or through straight wooden shafts, but adze heads must always have been mounted on a knee shaft, a crooked stick, a method regularly used for axe heads, too, by the Bronze Age. Axe heads like those in modern use, with a hole for the shaft, were rarely used for tools, but the Danubian peasants on the lowlands may sometimes have mounted adzes in this manner. They certainly knew how to perforate stone, using a tubular borer, a reed or bone with sand as an abrasive. From them the technique was adopted by various secondary Neolithic tribes in northern Europe for the manufacture of so-called battle axes. The latter seem to derive their form from Mesolithic weapons of antler, but their splayed blades disclose the influence of metal forms. Celts, or axes, were manufactured in factories where specially suitable rock outcrops occurred, and they were traded over great distances. Products of the factories at Greg Lwyd, Penmaenmawr, North Wales, were transported to Wiltshire and Anglesey, those of T. Bouliag on the Antrim coast to Limerick, Kent, Aberdeen, and the Hebrides. Similarly, large nodules of good flint were secured by mining in Poland, Denmark, the Netherlands, England, Belgium, France, Portugal, and Sicily. The mine shafts, which were cut through solid chalk sometimes to a depth of 6 meters, 20 feet, with the aid only of antler picks and bone shovels, may be simple pits, but often regular galleries branching from them follow the seams of big nodules. Although the ancient miners appreciated the necessity of leaving pillars to support the roof, skeletons of workers killed by falls have been discovered at Sisbury, Spiennes, and elsewhere. In the British Isles and Denmark, at least, there is evidence that the axe factories and flint mines were exploited and the products distributed by trade, for example, to the northern parts of Sweden. Still, the operators and distributors need nowhere be regarded as full-time specialists. Neolithic art, except among the hunter-fishers of the taiga, was geometric and not representational. It is best illustrated by the decoration of pottery. Pots, which were always handmade, were painted in southeastern Europe, southern Italy, and Sicily. Elsewhere they were adorned with incised, impressed, or stamped patterns. Many designs are skeuomorphic, they enhance the pot's similarity to vessels of basketry, skin, or other material. But on the lowlands of Central Europe and Ukraine and in the Balkans, spirals and meanders were favorite motifs. While Neolithic societies could be completely self-sufficient, growing their own food and making all essential equipment from local materials, luxury objects were transmitted quite long distances by some sort of trade. So ornaments made of the shells of the Mediterranean mussel, Spondylus gydarapus, are found all across the Balkans, up the Danube Valley, and even on the Sala and the Main. Products of factories and flint mines were, as stated, traded widely throughout a single province, such as the British Isles, and some especially valued raw materials, the yellow flint of Grand Pressigny, France, the obsidian of Melas and the Lipari Islands, became objects of international trade as much as shells. But the most prized object of such commerce was the amber of Jutland and Poland, whose electrical properties seemed evidence of potent mana. During the Paleolithic, two major culture provinces can be recognized in Asia, each of which has yielded a distinctive sequence. The first of these includes the Middle East, Central Asia, formerly Russian Turkestan, Central Siberia, and India, throughout this vast region a developmental sequence has been reported that, in all its essential respects, is related to that of Europe as well as to that of Africa in the early stages. The second of these provinces is in the south and east, and it embraces Pakistan, Myanmar, Burma, Java, Peninsular, West, Malaysia, Thailand, and China. There the characteristic implement types consist of choppers and chopping tools that are often made on pebbles. Hand axe industries of Abbevilio-Acheulean type are missing in southern and eastern Asia, together with the intimately associated prepared striking platform, tortoise core, or levallois, technique. There the pebble tool tradition persisted to the very end of Paleolithic times uninfluenced by contemporary innovations characteristic of the western portion of the continent. In this area, especially in Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria, a lower Paleolithic development closely paralleling that of Europe is indicated by the widespread distribution of hand axes of Abbevillian and Acheulean type. Unfortunately, the majority of these finds are from open-air, unstratified sites that cannot be dated. A flake industry, reminiscent of the Taillation of Western Europe, has been reported from several cave sites. This is followed by a typical upper Acheulean horizon in which there occur many developed hand axes of Mycoquean type, a wide variety of flake implements, and the prepared striking platform, tortoise core technique. The Levalloiso-Mousterian found in the next younger horizon is associated with a series of Neanderthaloid burials at one of the Mount Carmel caves of Israel and at Shanidar cave in northern Iraq. Next in the sequence comes an early Upper Paleolithic development, which is characterized by various types of blade and flake blade tools, including points that recall the Chattelperron type. This is overlain by the Antelian, formerly Middle Aurignacian, which in turn is followed by the Atlassian and the Kibarian. These assemblages, together with the Baradostan of northern Iraq, constitute specialized late Upper Paleolithic industries that preceded various Mesolithic developments in the Middle East. In Central Asia, few investigations of Paleolithic sites have been conducted. Surface finds of Acheulean-type hand axes have been reported from Turkmenistan, and several Mousterian localities have been excavated in southeastern Uzbekistan. At the most important of these sites, the cave of Teshiktash, the burial of a Neanderthal child who was surrounded by horns of a Siberian mountain goat was discovered. No convincing evidence was reported showing that this region was occupied during Upper Paleolithic times. Certain Paleolithic assemblages from India and Pakistan demonstrate that during Pleistocene times the region played an intermediate role between Western Asia and East Asia. In the Punjab province of Pakistan, assemblages of implements that are characteristic of both the chopper, chopping tool and the hand axe, levallois flake complexes have been found. The former, which is called the Sohanian, or Sohan, was reported from 5 successive horizons, each of which yields pebble tools that are associated with flake implements. Massive and rough in the earliest phases of the Sohanian, these implements reveal a progressive refinement in the younger horizons, where the evolved pebble tools are associated with flakes produced by the prepared striking platform, tortoise core technique. In part contemporary with the early Sohanian is a series of hand axes of Abbevilio-Acheulean affinities, which occur in profusion at numerous sites in India from Gujarat state in the north to the Chennai, Madras, area in the south. These sites yield hand axes, cleavers, and flake tools that are distinctly reminiscent of assemblages from southern and eastern Africa. As in the latter areas, the oldest materials are of Abbevillian type, and this is followed by the entire Acheulean cycle of development, just as in the case of the Stellenbosch of the Vaal Valley. Choppers and chopping tools made on pebbles and showing Sohanian affinities have been found throughout peninsular India in deposits of Middle Pleistocene age. Pebble tools, including choppers and chopping tools, are found in the Pleistocene terrace deposits of the Irrawaddy River valley of northern Myanmar. This complex is known as the Anyathian. The early Anyathian is characterized by single-edged core implements made on natural fragments of fossil wood and silicified tuff, and these are associated with flake implements. In the late Anyathian, a direct development from the earlier stage, smaller and better-made core and flake artifacts are found. No hand axes or flakes produced by the prepared striking platform, tortoise core technique have been found in Myanmar. Elsewhere in this region, pebble tools have been reported from deposits apparently of Middle Pleistocene age in western Thailand, for which the name Phing Ngoyen has been proposed. In northern Malaysia, a large series of choppers and chopping tools made on quartzite pebbles and found in Middle Pleistocene tin-bearing gravels have been referred to collectively as the Tampanian, since they come from a place called Kota Tampan in Perak. Still another late Middle Pleistocene assemblage, called the Pachitanian, is known from a very prolific site in south-central Java. In both the Tampanian and Pachitanian, the main types of implements consist of single-edged choppers and chopping tools that occur in association with flakes with unprepared, high-angle striking platforms. Also in both assemblages is an interesting series of pointed, bifacial implements that have been described as hand axes. Since these tools are very rare in each instance and are absent in Myanmar, it is probable that they were developed in Southeastern Asia independently of influences from the West. Several sites of Upper Pleistocene age in Central Java have produced artifacts made on small to medium-sized flakes and flake blades. Antler and bone implements belong to this complex, known as the Ngandanjan, which has also been reported from the Celebes and from the Philippines. One of the oldest Lower Paleolithic occupation sites ever discovered is near the village of Zucudian, about 48 kilometers, 30 miles southwest of Beijing in northern China. Associated with the remains of Peking man, Homo erectus pekinensis, formerly Sinanthropus pekinensis, pebble tools, together with quartz flake implements, occur in quantity. This assemblage, which is known as the Zucudianian, is of Middle Pleistocene age. It forms an integral part of the chopper-chopping tool tradition of East and Southeast Asia. Also in northern China, several Upper Paleolithic sites are known in the provinces of Shaanxi, and northern Gansu, in the region encompassed by the Great Bend of the Yellow River, Huanghe. Collectively known as the Ordosian, these materials are of Upper Pleistocene age. Typical of the Ordosian are blade implements of various types, points and scrapers of Mysterian-like appearance, and pebble tools of Zucudianian tradition. This development was originally classified as Mystero-Aurignacian, but it later became apparent that it had much in common with that of the Yenisei, Baikal region to the north, in central Siberia. The archaeological materials from the lost sites of Siberia between the Yenisei Valley and the Lake Baikal area are an interesting mixture of 1. Blade tools, together with antler, bone, and ivory artifacts of classic Upper Paleolithic type, 2. Points and scrapers made on flakes of Mysterian aspect, and 3. Pebble tools representing a survival of the ancient chopping tool tradition of Eastern Asia. Remains of semi-subterranean dwellings with centrally located hearths occur at certain of these stations, together with female statuettes in bone. One of the most striking features of this Siberian Upper Paleolithic is the fact of its comparatively late survival. In terms of the European sequence, it seems to have persisted as late as early Mesolithic times. Indeed, in several instances it actually occurs in the uppermost layer of loess immediately below a horizon of humus containing Neolithic campsites. The problems of the Siberian Upper Paleolithic are of obvious importance to students of New World archaeology, since they have an intimate and direct bearing on the question of the peopling of the Americas. There is little question that a level of an effective food-producing village farming community way of life had been achieved in certain portions of southwestern Asia by at least 7000 BCE. Furthermore, increasing evidence indicated that the effective village farming level was preceded by one of cultivation and animal domestication, and that this incipient level was at least underway by about 9000 BCE. The level of incipient cultivation and domestication was essentially restricted to the Piedmont and Intermontane Valley zone that flanks the Zagros, Taurus, Lebanon chain of highlands about the Great Basin of the Upper Tigris, Euphrates and Karun rivers and their tributaries. There are even hints that the zone extended to parts of the Iranian and Anatolian plateaus and that it may possibly have fingered northwest toward European Thrace. The significant point is that the zone appears to have formed a natural habitat for the cluster of plants and animals that were potentially domesticable. Most of these subsequent domesticates, wheat, barley, sheep, goats, cattle, and pigs, plus a possible wolf dog, still exist in their wild state in those parts of the zone that have been examined by prehistoric archaeologists and natural scientists. The level of incipient cultivation and domestication is best manifested by the archaeological materials of the Natufian group in the Palestine Syro-Lebanese littoral and parts of its hinterland, and by the Karim Shahir group in Iraqi and Iranian Kurdistan. The possibility of a continuation of the level into the northern Syrian and southern Turkish portions of the natural habitat zone has been essentially untested by modern field research. Both of the available complexes of materials, the Natufian and the Karim-Shahirian, appear to have been established by about 9000 BCE. In both there are clear indications of open settlements that were of modest size, and there are some traces of round huts, some of which were built on stone foundations, although caves are also known to have still been inhabited. Both groups yield traces of normal developments of flint industries that are based essentially upon local Upper Paleolithic antecedents, and both must have been influenced in their food getting by the already intensified food collecting practices of their immediate predecessors. It is freely admitted that the postulation of this incipient level rests considerably on a judgment that is based on the materials of the succeeding level of effective village farming communities. Nevertheless, it has been demonstrated that sheep were already being used at the incipient level, and there are such hints as flint sickles, groundstone mullers, mortars and pestles, and probable hoe blades to suggest that food plants were also receiving marked attention. Claims for the domesticated dog in the Natufian are not universally accepted, however. It has been rightly stressed that the materials of this level will be exceedingly difficult to interpret, since the earliest plant and animal domesticates will show little morphological difference from their wild contemporaries, and since the procedures and artifacts of the new food-getting and food preparation techniques will have taken considerable time to develop. The next level, that of the effective village farming community, yields, even in its earliest available phase, e.g., at Jarmo, in Iraqi Kurdistan, circa 700 BCE, materials that leave little doubt about the presence of food production. In the Jarmo phase, wheat, barley, a pea, goats, sheep, and, before the phase is completed, pigs and probably dogs all appear. The Jarmo settlement suggests a permanent village of about 20 rectangular several-roomed huts, which probably had a population of at least 150 people. Several other variants of the Jarmo phase have been excavated or at least located in Kurdistan. One of these, Sarab, near Kermanshah in Iran, suggests a seasonal encampment of herders. Sarab yields pottery throughout its shallow deposit. At Jarmo itself, similar pottery appeared only in the upper third of a much thicker deposit. Pre-ceramic village sites have been recovered in the Dead Sea Valley, along the Syro-Palestinian littoral, on Cyprus, in the southwestern Turkish highlands, and even in Thessalian Greece. The very spectacular architectural remains of the Dead Sea Valley site of Tal al-Sulm, reputedly also the site of the later Jericho, suggest a long occupation. Traces have been found of visits of Mesolithic hunters, radiocarbon dated to about 9000 BCE, and by about 8000 BCE inhabitants had grown into an organized community of some 2000 to 3000 persons. Thus, this 1000 years had seen movement from a hunting way of life to full settlement. By 1600 BCE or not long thereafter, a variety of more or less complete regional cultural sequences developed in the Middle East. In Iran two sequences appeared. That beginning at the site of Sialk developed most characteristically in the northern and northeastern parts of the country and evidently extended into what is now Turkmenistan and northern Baluchistan and possibly beyond to the Industry. A somewhat different tradition developed in southwestern and southern Iran, early traces of which may be seen at Jaffrabad in Suziana, Elam, and at Bakunbi near Persepolis. This tradition exhibited a closer proximity to the earlier sites in Iraq. Its eastern extension may also be traced as far as Baluchistan, if not beyond into the Indus Valley. The earliest full-bodied assemblage in northern Iraq, following that of Jarmo, is the Hassanin of the Mosul, Kirkuk Piedmont. Next, either as elements in the developed Hassanin phases or alone at the mid-Euphrates site of Baguz or at the mid-Tigris site of Samarra, comes the Samran phase. Then, with further overlap, comes the Halafian phase of the upper, Syro-Turkish Iraqi, Piedmont. The overlapping of these three assemblages is indicated by the availability of a radiocarbon determination for an early Halafian level, which is as early as either of the two determinations of the Hassanin, about 5750 BCE. The beginning of the food-producing sequence in classic southern Mesopotamia comes after this time and is, perhaps, partly an amalgam of, 1. A southward extension of Hassuna, Samarra, Halaf traits, 2. The westward extension of early Suziana traits from southwestern Iran, and, 3. the probable presence of indigenous riverine-oriented food collectors. Another local tradition, at least contemporary with that of Hazuna, and perhaps earlier than that of Sialk, appears to have its focus in the Syro-Cilician corner of the eastern Mediterranean. Its pre-ceramic antecedents may be seen in the basal levels of coastal Ras Shamra. Later this Syro-Cilician tradition appears to have been affected by the Halafian and later inland developments. To the north of Syro-Cilicia the early materials of Hassler and of Seattlehuyuk must be given place, including the possibility of their implications for the early developments in the Aegean. To the south the Syro-Cilician tradition merged gradually into a somewhat related coastal Palestinian tradition. But in the more arid reaches of inland Palestine a somewhat different tradition developed that appears to have culminated in the sites of semi-nomadic traders, such as that at Beersheba. Food production appears to have reached Egypt, and northern Africa generally, about 4,500 BCE. Such northern Egyptian occurrences as Merimd, on the western flank of the Nile Delta, and the Fayum, Apit sites might argue for an expansion directly, by boats, from the Asian coast. But some authorities favor the idea of a way into Middle Egypt via the Red Sea and the Wadi Rawid to account for the available developments there. This very compressed sketch is meant only to suggest the variety of regional variations and adjustments within the general development of the effective village farming level in the Middle East, from about 1600 to 4500 BCE. Wheat and barley were the staple crops, cattle joined sheep, goats, and pigs as major food animals, at least by the Halafian phase. Villages, except the tall Al-Som fortified establishment, were small. An informed guess would put their limit of population at about 500 people. Again, except for some interpretations of certain rather modest buildings as shrines, the architecture appears to be entirely domestic in nature. Aesthetic expression also took the form of an almost bewildering variety of regionalized and successive painted pottery styles. The modeling of clay figurines, already well attested in the phase of Jarmo and its contemporaries, continues, with both animals and stylized human females being rendered. The latter, especially, may be suspected as having represented some magico-religious aspect of concern with fertility, upon which the livelihood of the communities depended. Flint tools were gradually replaced by copper and, eventually, by bronze implements, and the early trade routes in obsidian, a volcanic glass of restricted occurrence, were doubtless taken over by the metallurgists. Certain artifacts indicate the presence of weaving. In addition to their local utility, woven fabrics may also have served as media of exchange. It would be difficult to maintain that there was a strict subdivision of labor on a full-time scale, except perhaps on a basis of sex or age, but such a trend must have been setting in. It should be emphasized that the complexity of this picture cannot readily be conceived apart from a system of effective food production. It may also be noted that an older trend was not being reversed. The intensified food collecting at the close of the Pleistocene was apparently accompanied by increasing regional specialization and a tendency toward full utilization of a rather restricted environmental niche. Now, with the establishment and spread of the effective village farming community, its expansion beyond the confines of the natural habitat zone, and the beginnings of trade, the horizon began to widen again. The oikoumene, or known world of these first effective village farmers, became an ever-expanding one. Hence, just as it is probably not very fruitful to ask exactly where any particular element was invented or first discovered within the level of incipient cultivation and domestication in the natural habitat zone, it is probably most useful to view the development of the way of life of the effective village farming community as a general regional phenomenon of cultural interrelationships and stimulations. It might be further suggested that this general development took place over a broad area that had certain localized environmental variables and natural resources. These environmental conditions, however, had been there, just as the natural habitat zone itself had been, long before incipient and effective food production came into being. The latter were human, cultural achievements. Favorable environment, though it enabled them to come into being, did not cause them. The end of prehistory and the threshold of urban civilization are first seen in classic southern Mesopotamia about 4,500 BCE. The materials of the Ubaidian assemblage make their appearance after a still rather poorly delineated phase in the basal levels of the mound of Eridu. Whatever elements combined in the earliest amalgam, northern Iraqian, suzerain, or indigenous, the resultant traits of the Ubaidian tradition are revealed in their greatest clarity, consistency, and variety in southern Mesopotamia by 4000 BCE. There are mound accumulations and at least one large cemetery, which suggest a scale of communities well beyond that of the simple village. Buildings sufficiently large, formal in design and size, and monumental in concept and decoration to be judged as temples were present. Great quantities of painted pottery of high quality appear in the excavations. This pottery, by its very uniformity and the somewhat cursive nature of its decoration, may already have been the product of specialized craftsmen. Quantities of very highly fired clay tools, axes, adzes, sickles, have been found from Ubaidian contexts in southern Mesopotamia. These were useful for cutting the pithy woods, reeds, and grain of the southern alluvial environment or for dressing sun-baked bricks. The female clay figurines continued, but in a unique and highly characteristic stylization. A Ubaidian town supplied itself from fields of wheat and barley and its animal herds. The agricultural regime in the hot, dry alluvium of southern Mesopotamia depends, however, upon the utilization of the braided lower channels of the Tigris and especially of the Euphrates. Though elaborate irrigation works did not exist, the management of even quite informal ditches, with necessary shifts when the natural channels of the rivers shifted, added a new dimension to the socio-political necessities of Ubaidian culture. This system of irrigation may have been one of the factors that contributed to the expansion of society in late prehistoric Mesopotamia. Given the proper management and water, the yield of the rich alluvial soil was magnificent, until salinity became a problem several centuries later. There were also important dietary additions, such as dates from the groves of date palms and fish from the river channels and ditches. With southern Mesopotamia as its focus, the Ubaidian tradition exported some of its elements at least as far as the Mediterranean coast and throughout the great upper drainage basin of the Tigris, Euphrates and Karun rivers. These exported traits doubtless reflect the growth of another oikoumene, and one much more explicitly southern Mesopotamian in character. In southern Mesopotamia itself, the Ubaidian phase was followed, after a Warkan interval, by the so-called Proto-Literate period, in which the usual criteria of civilization are manifest. It is known that village farming communities existed in the Indus Valley as early as 3000 BCE, if not earlier. The original complexion of their assemblages resembled those of Iran, and perhaps those of the Ubaidian imprint on southwestern Iran, but this complexion gradually changed to something characteristic of the Indus Valley itself and evidently culminated in the Harappan urban civilization. Some degree of contact between the cities of the Indus and of Mesopotamia certainly continued to exist, however. It is becoming evident that the Harappan complex was not restricted to the Indus Valley alluvium but extended into the adjacent semi-tropical portions of India as well. Knowledge of the developmental sequence in China is incomplete. Except for a few snatches of typologically simpler materials, the first evidence of food production in China appears to pertain to a well-advanced phase of the effective village farming community level. This is the Yangshao complex, focused in the basin about the confluence of the Yellow River, Huanghe, and the Fan River. Characterized by a handsome painted pottery style, the Yangshao catalogue also includes cultivated millet, rice, kaoyang, sorghum, and possibly soybeans, as well as domesticated pigs, cattle, sheep, dogs, chickens, and possibly the horse and silkworm. The village houses were built of tamped earth. There was a flourish of ceremonial pottery vessels and of elaborately worked objects in jade, as well as flint, bone, and groundstone objects of daily use. The Yangshao phase is followed by that called Longshan, after which comes the Shang, or Yin, early dynastic complex of about 1500 BCE. The date for the beginning of the Yangshao is unknown but is sometimes given as 5000 to 3000 BCE. Even less is known of southern China and southeastern Asia. The former seems to have been affected by the expansion of the makers of the Longshan black pottery and perhaps was also stimulated from the south. The rather amorphous Hoabinian and Baxonian sequence in Indochina, with groundstone axes and adzes, appears to be quite late, perhaps of the first millennium BCE. In Japan, on the other hand, the first appearance of pottery of early Jomon type, the Jomon period is tentatively dated from about 10,500 to about 300 BCE, based on radiocarbon dating, was considerably earlier. Positive cultivation, wet rice, appears in Japan about only at the end of the Jomon. The Mesolithic, Neolithic era and the settlement of northern Siberia started in the 7th to 6th millennia BCE, the period of climatic optimum in post-glacial times, when forest conditions were introduced. Stratified sites in the Lake Baikal area show a long and gradual transition from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic stage. The post-glacial culture in Siberia was a hunter and fisher culture, except in southern Siberia around the Aral Sea, with a microlithic flint industry in western and southern Siberia and with polished stone tools, pointed or round-based pottery, and bow and arrow, starting about the 4th millennium BCE in almost all parts of Siberia. The territories of this vast area are divisible into two blocks: 1, the southwestern, covering the area from the Caspian Sea to the upper Yenisei, extending over the zones of semi-desert, steppe, and forest steppe, and 2, the eastern and northern, covering mountainous regions from Lake Baikal to the Pacific Ocean and the taiga, coniferous forest, and tundra belts of northern Siberia. The first is represented by peoples of European descent, the second by peoples of Asian descent. These two groups were in conflict until the latter overcame the former in several waves. The earliest Neolithic culture in the steppes and in the oases may reach the 4th millennium or earlier. The small flint industry continued from the earlier Mesolithic times. In the 3rd millennium BCE, copper, painted ware, and other elements from the south entered the area. Sheep, cattle, and horses were the chief domesticated animals. Copper knives and stone sledges for mining appeared. Pottery was mostly round-bottomed, decorated with geometric stamped or scratched patterns in rows. Typical burial of the dead was in a contracted position under an earth mound. Excavations in Khwarezm, Khiva, revealed large communal houses of oval form. In the region of the Aral Sea, Khwarezm, this culture was given the name Kelteminar, while in Altai and the region of Bisk, Krasnodar, and Minyasinsk it was known as Afanasevo, although related cultural features are found between southern Russia and the upper Yenisei, the area presumed to be Indo-European homeland. The Afanasevo was replaced by the Okhanev group of stock breeders, famous for stone stelae incised with mythical figures, elsewhere in southern Siberia. Continuous cultural development is seen in the 2nd millennium BCE. This culture, named Andronovo, is relatively uniform in this wide area, in spite of some local variations. Agriculture now played an important role. People lived in earth huts and reared cattle, sheep, and horses. Bowl and flowerpot-shaped vessels were flat-bottomed, well-smoothed, decorated with geometric patterns, triangles, rhombs, and meanders, pointing to relationship with the painted pottery of the southern regions. Burial in contracted position persisted. The typical elements of a religion of food producers, the fire and sun cult, as well as bread offering, are evidenced. Wooden constructions in rich graves may have designated social differentiation. The Andronovo complex is intimately related to the timber grave, Russian Shrubna, group in southern Russia, both represent branches of the Indo-Iranian cultural bloc. In the second half of the 2nd millennium BCE in the region of Minyasinsk, a synod group broke in that brought with it a bronze inventory of Ordos, northern China, type. Cemeteries of single graves covering the dead in extended position in stone cists, equipped with round-bottomed pots, appeared. New people mixed with the local Andronovo population. Through this immigration the so-called Karasuk culture originated and spread its influences farther to western Siberia and Russian Turkestan. Trade relations extended to central Russia. Exchange with the centers of the East Asian metallurgy introduced a new character of material culture, daggers and knives terminating in animal sculptures, series of ornaments, and stimulated the flourishing of metal industry in a wide area. The regions west of Minyasinsk, Altai, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan, show variations of Karasuk culture with strong local elements with which the persistence of the ancient ethnic type corresponds. Chronology of this period is based on comparisons with northern Chinese bronzes. The Karasuk period persisted down to about 700 BCE. From about 700 to about 200 BCE, culture developed along similar lines. Vital trade contact is traced from northern China and the Baikal region to the Black Sea and the Urals, influencing the uniformity of the culture. A mounted warrior element occurred, although the agricultural and cattle breeding elements persisted. In the High Altai, Tian Shan, and Pamirs appeared graves of nomadic warriors with co-burial of horses. Regarding the local facies, or separate political confederations, cultures of this period are named differently in different regions. The art of the steppe zone from southern and eastern Russia to China developed into specific animal style. The decorative talent is illustrated in the great ingenuity that the artist displayed in filling up with animal figures a shape determined by practical ends. The elk, ram, bird, and cat animal portrayals of the middle of the first millennium BCE exhibit a conjunction of the highest verisimilitude with rigorous stylization. Later the organic form of the animal was ruled by extreme stylization. The elements of naturalism link this style with the naturalistic animal style of the northern Eurasian forest belt. New motifs in the steppe and forest steppe belt, portrayal of groups of animals, antithetic and intertwined groups of bodies, curled-up animals, beasts, and birds of prey, originated in a borrowing of ideas from the Middle East and China. Pre-Christian culture, although influenced by the Persian Empire, progressed gradually until the new flow from the east started. The territory between the lower Volga and Altai represents a unit with a common destiny. Chinese and Western sources report that the Sarmatian, Sakian time was followed by the supremacy of the Hun people, who dominated the western steppes as far as the Urals and the Volga. Archaeological investigations show that the east-west movement started at a time when the Hun Confederation had not yet been consolidated. In eastern Kazakhstan appeared an eastern group of stone tombs people not later than the 5th century BCE. The main east-west stream ran presumably from Manchuria, Upper Lena, along the northern border of the Gobi, into the Lake Balkhash territory, and from there on, avoiding powerful cities in Khwarezm, into the steppes north of the Caspian. For centuries up to the consolidation of the Turkish Khanate in the 6th century CE, Asian components were mingling with the local European, which have never been wiped out. The cultural pattern from Altai to Transbaikalia in the last centuries BCE and 1st centuries CE is largely traced to China of the Han period. Social differentiation is evidenced by princely burials, extraordinarily well preserved in 5 large burial mounds of Pazyryk and Shaib in the High Altai. Complete burial places were frozen, and even perishable substances were preserved, including human bodies and horses with harness and saddles, textiles, felt and leather objects, clothing, fur coats, false beards, besides jewelry, mirrors, hair plates, etc. All materials were finished with virtuosity. The art combined animal, plant, geometric, and human designs. Polychromy played an important part. Mummification, tattooing, scalping, and the use of amulets are evidenced. Meanwhile, in the region of the Aral Sea, the apogee of the Khwarezm civilization was reached in the epoch of the Empire of the Kushans. During the 1st and 2nd centuries CE the irrigation system attained its greatest development. Numerous cities were built along the banks of the canals. The Arctic and subarctic zones exhibit a continuous culture belt in a Neolithic stage from boreal times through several millennia. Making of pottery and polishing of stones, but neither farming nor domestication of animals, except the dog, were known. People lived in small semi-nomadic communities, in semi-subterranean houses. The Arctic seashores demonstrate sea hunter cultures. In the north this form of living lasted into the 21st century. The region of the Amur River in eastern Siberia shows a long-lasting Neolithic, of which the oldest forms resemble certain finds of northern Japan, Proto-Ainu, and China. Cultural continuity is traced from the Neolithic through the stages in which copper smelting and iron were known. In the farthest northeast, archaeological and other data suggest that the Idolman, Koryak, and Chukchi entered the area from the west less than 2,000 years ago and found the coastal region occupied by a population related to the Inuit. The Ural region was linked with the northern Russian and western Siberian culture on one hand and with the Aral Sea region on the other. Throughout the Neolithic and Bronze Age times, 2 cultural branches were evident, the Middle Ural, or Shigar, and that of the Ob River Basin. During the 3rd and 2nd millennia BCE, the culture of the Middle Ural region is famous for its elk and waterbird sculptures portrayed in wood, found in the peat bogs of Gorbunovo and Shigar, and that of the Upper Ob region for its cemeteries in the area of Tomsk, abundant art objects, including bear figurines, and rock carvings. Cultural relationships between the northern Baltic and northwestern Siberia, forming a continuum up to the early historic period, furnish this area with the characteristics of the homelands of the Finno-Ugric-speaking peoples. The best explored regions are the shores of Lake Baikal, the Angara Valley, the Upper Lena, and the Lower Selengal. The earliest Neolithic culture shows Siberian Upper Paleolithic traits. The flint tradition of small implements persisted alongside a woodworking and quartzite industry, which developed as a result of adaptation to a taiga environment. Chronological phases are based chiefly on the Angara grave materials by means of stratigraphy and comparisons. The following successive cultures are discerned: 1. Isakovo, showing the earliest appearance of pottery, alongside flint and bone tools, arrowheads, knives, points, half-ground adzes. Pointed-based pots in Isakovo probably were copies of similarly shaped baskets. Art monuments are not numerous here. The period may reach back to about 4000 BCE. 2. Surovo, characterized by thinner pottery, decorated by dentate stamping, boss, pit, and net impressions, and by stone inventory of more regular forms. Reinforced bows with bone backing and fish effigies of stone appear. A marked increase of population is indicated by settlements covering hundreds of square meters, including storage pits for fish. In cemeteries, women's graves were richly equipped, which may indicate women's equal rights in Surovo community. Surovo people migrated to the steppe and deserts of Central Asia and Inner Mongolia. The period belongs to the 3rd millennium BCE. 3. Kitoi, placed before the middle of the 2nd millennium BCE, shows a variety of more developed forms of equipment. The great number of fishhooks found in the graves indicates that subsistence was now based primarily on fishing instead of hunting. Sculptures of human faces in stone, stone rings, and nephrite and copper objects appear. Close parallels in stone and bone industry, as well as in art style, are found from northern Scandinavia and northern Russia to China. 4. Glaskovo, extending through the middle of the 2nd millennium BCE to about 1300 BCE, continues a similar mode of life. Novelties include the appearance of burial mounds and burials in stone cists, copper knives and arm rings, nephrite rings and discs. The first bronze inventory in the region of Lake Baikal is related to the bronzes of the Shang period in northern China and the earliest Ordos bronzes. Life was then of semi-settled character, and cattle breeding was known. Continuity of culture in the Bronze Age stage is traced up to about 300 BCE. The period between about 700 and 300 BCE in Transbaikalia, called Stone Tombs I, exhibits a transition to nomadism and mounted warrior conditions. Cultural elements held in common with the Scythian steppe zone appear as far in the northeast as the Lena River. South, north and north-south movements are attested in the last centuries BCE. The south-north movement is assumed as Saka, Yakut, migration from the Baikal to the Upper Lena region, the north-south movement from Cisbaikalia to Transbaikalia as migration of the Taiga group, related to the Tungus of the present day. The Paleolithic of Africa is characterized by a variety of stone tool assemblages, some of which represent purely local developments while others are practically identical with materials from corresponding horizons in Europe. Geological investigations of the late Cenozoic deposits of this continent indicate that, as the result of fluctuations in rainfall, the Pleistocene epoch throughout most of Africa can be subdivided on the basis of a succession of pluvial and interpluvial stages. The pluvials, known as Kajran, Kamasian, Kandran, and Gamblian, are believed to represent the tropical and subtropical equivalents of the 4 major glacial stages of the Northern Hemisphere. The archaeological succession is well established in certain areas, although not in the continent as a whole. In this area, pebble tools have been reported from one site in Algeria in direct association with a lower Pleistocene, Villafranchian, mammalian assemblage. Throughout Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and the Sahara region, lower Paleolithic hand axes of both Abavillian and Acheulean type, together with flake tools, have been found in great numbers. The geological evidence shows that the Sahara region was far less arid during Pleistocene times than it is at present. The Middle Paleolithic of both Levalloisian and Mousterian facies is very widespread in North Africa, and it apparently persisted as late as the second maximum of the Worm glaciation in terms of the European sequence. A specialized Middle Paleolithic development, known as the Aterian, occurred there. It is characterized by tanged points made on flakes and flake blades. This was succeeded by two distinctive blade tool complexes, the Capsian and Oranian, which are more or less contemporary. Their main development took place during the time span of the European Mesolithic. The Capsian sites are all inland, whereas the Oranian has a coastal distribution. Both are microlithic tool complexes that persisted after the introduction of Neolithic traits into the area. The Pleistocene terrace gravels of the Nile Valley in Egypt have produced a wealth of Paleolithic materials. The 30-meter, 98-foot, terrace contains typical Abovilian and early Acheulean hand axes, including a special form with a triangular section known as the Colossian type. These are associated with early flake implements. In the 15-meter, 49-foot, terrace, developed Acheulean has been recorded, while the 9-meter, 29.5-foot, terrace yields large flakes and cores of Levalloisian type. In the low terrace, which occurs at a height of 3 meters, 10 feet, above river level, developed Levalloisian, originally called Mousterian, has been reported. Overlying the low terrace, a local development known as the Sibyllian is found. It contains very highly evolved flake implements of Levallois type and, in its later phases, a definite microlithic industry. Of approximately the same age as the Sibyllian are several Apilevalloisian sites in the lower Nile drainage, including the Fayum Depression and the Al-Kharija, Karga, oasis. In the latter area, where the specialized Levalloisian development is called the Kargan, an Egyptian version of the Aterian has been discovered. In Kenya, the oldest known tools, consisting of early hammers, anvils, and cutting tools, date to the Middle Pliocene epoch and predate the emergence of the oldest confirmed specimens of Homo by almost 1 million years. The tools were discovered in a dry riverbed near Kenya's Lake Turkana. Also in Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda, types of pebble tools, roughly chipped to an edge on one side only, occur in deposits of lower Pleistocene age. This development, known as the Cafuan, apparently evolved into an industry characterized by implements made on pebbles chipped to an edge on both sides, called the Oldowan. Overlying the latter are beds containing true Lower Paleolithic hand axes of Abovilian and Acheulean type, together with flake tools. Associated with the Middle and Late Acheulean are cleavers made on flakes, as well as evidence of the use of the prepared striking platform, tortoise core, Levallois, technique in the production of flakes. In the next younger horizon, two distinct toolmaking traditions are found, the Kenya still bay, a Levalloisian derivative characterized by small to medium-sized, bifacially flaked points or minute hand axes, and the Kenya four-smith, basically of Acheulean inspiration and very similar to the true four-smith of southern Africa. Carefully shaped round stone balls, believed to have been used as bolo weights in hunting, constitute part of the four-smith assemblage. In the post-Gambian dry phase, microlithic tools appear for the first time in an assemblage known as the Magosian. This was followed by the introduction into the area of a true blade technique, called the Kenya Capsian, together with the art of pottery making. More or less contemporary with the localities where the earliest pottery is found in East Africa, a series of sites has been discovered yielding typical microlithic assemblages and referable to the Kenya Wilton, also found in South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Zambia. The sequence in southern Africa is well established on the basis of the terrace stratigraphy of the Vaal Valley. These develop into what is called the pre-Stellenbosch, which is found in the oldest gravels of the Vaal and which includes artifacts made on pebbles that recall both the Cafuan and the Oldowan. The true Stellenbosch complex occurs in the next younger series of deposits. It is simply a southern African version of the Abovilian and Acheulean of other parts of Africa and Europe. Typical are hand axes, cleavers, flakes struck from Victoria West cores, and, in its later phases, various sorts of flakes produced by the prepared striking platform, tortoise core technique. The Stellenbosch was followed by the four-smith, which is characterized by evolved hand axes and Levallois type flakes. The Stellenbosch and Foursmith together constitute what is called the South African Older Stone Age, a period roughly corresponding to the Lower and Middle Paleolithic stages of Europe. On the other hand, the South African Middle Stone Age belongs to the later part of the Upper Pleistocene. It is characterized by a series of more or less contemporary flake tool assemblages, each of which displays local features. These are known as Mossel Bay, Polokwane, Hoassins Port, Bambata Cave, Still Bay, etc. Still Bay, which occurs in Kenya and Uganda, is the only one of these found outside southern Africa. The characteristic tools are made on flakes produced by a developed Levalloisian technique, including slender unifacial and bifacial lances or spear points for stabbing or throwing. In the final stages of the Middle Stone Age, known as the South African Magosian, microlithic elements appear, just as in the case of East Africa. The later Stone Age cultures of this region, the Smithfield and the Wilton, developed during post-Pleistocene times. These are closely related and, in their later stages, reveal varying degrees of influence as the result of contact with the culture introduced by the Bantu-speaking peoples. Both were extant at the time the first Europeans arrived in southern Africa, and there is little doubt that the Wilton, which is a typical microlithic assemblage, is to be associated with the modern San, Bushman. There are many paintings in the rock shelters and engravings on stones in the open-air sites of southern Africa, the oldest of which belong to the later Stone Age. The naturalistic style of art revealed that these sites persisted until well into historic times. The lower Paleolithic sequence of Central, or Equatorial, Africa is essentially a repetition of what has already been outlined for East and Southern Africa. At the beginning of Middle Stone Age times, however, a special development took place known as the Sangoan, formerly Tumbian. This is characterized by picks and adzes made on bifacially flaked cores, the tranchette type of axe, hand axes of developed Acheulean form, massive side scrapers, and many elongated, bifacially flaked points that probably served as lances or spearheads. The Sangoan seems to represent a response to the environmental conditions of this tropical rainforest region. Its main development took place during Upper Pleistocene times, but it persisted after the introduction of Neolithic traits into the area.